So in this video, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how to get started in RStudio. So you can see it on the screen right now. It looks a little bit intimidating, perhaps, if you're opening this up for the first time, you don't really know where to get started. So I'm just going to jump straight into it and let's see if we can get 2 plus 2 in R going, your standard kind of hello world introduction. On the left-hand side here, you've got what's called the console. So this is an area you could just type R command straight into. So I could just type 2 plus 2, press enter, that gives me 4. This is not really getting the main benefits out of using RStudio. So what we really want to do is we want to have a script file, we want to have a collection of our commands that we bring together into a single location to give us some nice reproducible and editable syntax that we can use to run our analyses and share with other people and get into all sorts of interesting projects. So how can we start doing that? These buttons at the top, this first one here, is create a new R file. And again, it's a little bit intimidating to be met with about 20 different options when you first start here. My recommendation is to use this format called R Markdown. This is a slightly newer format. It's specific to RStudio, but I'll explain a little bit as I go through why I think this is a good format. What I'm going to do here, again, is kind of ignore most of these options and click this button, Create Empty Document here. So this is now an R Markdown file. And you can see it's minimized that console window only into the bottom half. And I'm kind of left with just another blank page. So I'm going to write at the top anything I like. So within this R Markdown file, I can put in a title to this project explaining what I am doing. I should probably spell project correctly. There we go. And within this document, I can combine notes and explanations as well as code. So if I want to bring in some R code, I need to add in what's called a chunk. And over here, this C with a plus, this introduces a chunk of code. I'm only going to work in R today, but you can see that you can bring in a number of different programming languages to the same file, which is quite a nice little feature that RStudio has. So you see now you've got this R chunk of code from clicking on that button, which delineates the code in, you've got the hashes and an R in some squiggly brackets, some buttons over here, and then the hashes at the bottom to delineate that section of code. So I can again put in 2 plus 2 here. If I press enter now, that doesn't run the code, that just adds in a new line. So to run the code from the chunk, what I do is I press this button here, and that tells me that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And underneath this, I can then write, hooray, 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's a really good idea as you are working in a script file, probably doing something more complicated than 2 plus 2, but to make notes as you're going through, explaining what you're doing, why you're doing it, and in case you're encountering difficulties or surprises along the way, writing these notes to yourself as you are creating this file is so useful for when you pick it up in a few months' time or a few years' time and you're trying to remember what on earth was I doing with this particular project. So this can be done right from scratch, but now I'm going to show you how we can go through and create a project file in R and perhaps look at a slightly more full piece of analysis which has already been done. Okay, so I've pulled up this folder which contains some files that I've downloaded. This is some solutions to a ggplot exercise. And I can see I've got an RMD, so this is the format for an R Markdown file when I save it, and I've got a data set. And I could just click here and open this file, and that would open it up in RStudio. But I think a better way here of dealing with this, I'm going to ignore that I've done that for now, is to set up a project file. And the project file is a really nice way of grouping together my data and my output and my script files all into the same location. And it makes it much more shareable and it makes a few things a little bit easier. And so previously I created an R Markdown file by clicking on the first plus here with the white string. The next one along creates an R project file. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm not going to save what I've been working on so far. I've only really done 2 plus 2. Since I've got that folder already on my computer, I'm going to say it's in an existing directory. And then I'm going to find where that folder is, and here it is, Module 2 Solutions. And then I'm going to click Create a Project. And that will take a few seconds to load up here. And again, we're met with the same sort of thing we saw when we first opened RStudio of not a lot, but immediately there's something which is different if you very paying close attention. Over here in this bottom right window, which I've sort of ignored so far, this is automatically now set to that folder of the project location. In this case, there's not many files hanging around. There's my data file, there's my script file, my markdown file. It's created now the project file. But if I have lots of files in there and I've got lots of different projects on the go, that's a really useful way of moving straight to there. So now clicking on that file opens it straight up in R. I don't need to worry about opening it up through the folder system, finding where it is exactly. And the nice thing about using these markdown files is the output, as we saw when we did 2+2, it comes in the same location as our script file. It comes underneath. So we don't actually really need this console window. We can just have more space to focus on our script window. So I'm going to minimize that console window. There's a really important point when using any kind of scripting in R, which is to make sure you've got your libraries downloaded and installed and loaded. So in this particular markdown file, you can see at the beginning of my file, I'm loading in the ggplot2 library. This will run straight away because I've already installed ggplot on my version of RStudio. But if you haven't installed ggplot2, what you will need to do at this point is install and download that package. Every time you use that package, you still need to use this library command. But the first time that you come across ggplot2 or any other library, you'll need to install it. So I can see the list of packages that I currently have installed. If I go over to this bottom right packages menu, I've got quite a lot installed on my computer. But if I find there is one that's missing, I can click on this install button here and type in ggplot2. And hopefully, if I'm connected to the internet, I don't have a nasty firewall going on. It should be able to get to the internet, install that package, and load it into my version of R. It's always another important thing to make sure you do update the version of R itself fairly regularly, as one of the issues with installing new packages can be that you're working on an older version of R. Generally 2 or 3 times a year, they update R. So just something to be aware of if you're coming across errors while doing that. And when you're putting in these libraries, even if it's not until way, way down in your code where you realize, oh, hang on, I need to use dplyr today, it's kind of important to put it right at the top of your script. Again, it makes it easier for somebody setting up. They just need to worry about, okay, which libraries do I load at the very beginning, not something that they need to worry about later on. It can get confusing if you start doing that. And the other thing that's always worth doing straight away is reading in your data immediately. And I actually ran this already because I put them in the same chunk when I wrote this code originally. And you can see when you run and read in a data file, in this case, it reads in the Pulse data file, which, because it was set up as a project file and it's in that folder already, it can find pulse.csv immediately. You don't have to worry about complicated folder locations or setting working directories. This is all done for you with the project file. And when it reads it in, it puts it into our environment window. So we're now looking at this top right corner for the first time. And this is telling us, hey, look, we've got a data set. It's called Pulse because we called it Pulse. And it tells us immediately we've got 350 observations, 10 variables. I click on the green arrow and it gives me a little preview of the columns which are in my data, gender, age group, race, and so on. It tells us if it's character, female, male, or integer in the case of age, 70, 72. Got quite a lot of older people in this survey by the look of it. I seem to remember that from working with it before. We can see the full data if we click on the name rather than the blue arrow here. So you can see clicking on that loads up here a sort of spreadsheet view where I can now see the full data for all of the entries, all 350 observations if I were to scroll down. That's quite a nice interactive way of looking at the data to try to understand how it's formatted, what each column is, what the contents of each column is. So as I work through now, I might get to an example here in the first chunk where I am going to make a plot. And again, I'm going to minimize that console window because the nice thing again about RStudio is we see our plots in line as we work through. So running this green button here will make our nice plot appear in the chunk below. And there's even a way of making it look perhaps nicer than this as well. You've got the source version or the visual version of the editor. The visual version of the editor, it will ask you for a few options perhaps, but we can write our code and write our comments around our code here in exactly the same sort of way here, where it now looks a little bit tidied up in terms of the formatting, and our code and our output is all in line. And this is still entirely editable and changeable, and we can run the code. So we want to bring in some color, so put fill based on age group perhaps in there. And if we press that run button, it will now update the plot, and we see our colors nicely appearing. And as long as when you're writing code, you're keeping together your chunks in simple format. So you have one chunk for one task, if you like, and then you're explaining outside of the chunk what's going on, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. Then the possibilities of using R Markdown files become even nicer because you can create nice knitted output. So if I save my changes, which has the fill for age group, what I can do, as long as there are no errors in my code, is create a report. So if I click here on this knit button, it will whir away for a little bit. You can see something's happening in the files window. And there we go. And in the viewer, what happens by default is we get sort of a HTML report of all of our output. And because we've done a project file, if I go back to that folder, that HTML file, that's now there, created. We can share that with people to show them the results of our analysis and show them the code that we had to make that analysis. If we prefer a Word file, you can see in here we can create a PDF, we can create a Word file. The first time that you do this, you will probably be asked to install some more packages, unless you already have those ones installed within RStudio. And the important thing for making these outputs, getting this nice knitted formatting, is that we need to make sure there are no errors in the code, and we need to make sure it runs sequentially. So if I moved this chunk where I read in the data and created the library, if I moved it after the first plot, even though within R, I have already loaded the library and loaded the data, if I now try and knit this, it's going to give me an error because it will rerun the whole file from scratch, and it will say, hang on, there's a problem going on here because you're trying to use ggplot and use this data even though you haven't loaded that in. So I need to make sure things are running sequentially and things are running without any errors. So we've got to have a nice clean code and nice explained explanations around that. So that was just a quick introduction to how you can get started with RStudio. There's all sorts of other features in here as well, but the most important things to be able to do are to create a new Markdown file and be able to insert chunks of code and run chunks of code, and make sure that you don't end up doing anything stupid as you're going through. So working sequentially, loading your libraries first, installing your packages before loading your libraries. And if you start getting clever and advanced, you'll start being able to create nice reports showing all of your analysis and all of your results and sharing it with everyone else. This is the real benefit of RStudio versus using R on its own, is how integrated these tools are for writing and viewing your data and your scripts and your plots, and really making it easy to make little tweaks or share your script files with someone else who would be able to give you support, because you can get a slightly better view of the whole picture of what's happening with your data and what's happening with your analysis. And at the same time, it's being nice and reproducible and shareable as well.